Hey guys, welcome to the show. This is your host, Fantastic Facade. I am joined with my trusty co-host, Triple A the Humanist, as normal. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Richard Anderson, is going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about the future of humanity. So I'm going to get this over to this main screen. We have questions up live. If you have any questions, you can ask them in chat, and we'll try to get them in front of them. But Mr. Anderson, if you could just kind of give us a brief introduction about yourself and your expertise, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Okay. Well, my educational background is in microbiology, molecular biology, and biochemistry. So you wonder, what am I doing with topics about the future, futurism, space, and Big Bang, and all of that stuff? Why am I talking about evolution of societies and how that might develop into the future if we have a future? But I have done an awful lot of reading on the topic, and when COVID lockdown hit, I was starting to take notes and write this book. And then when the lockdown occurred, well, I pursued it with a vengeance. I couldn't, I couldn't travel. I couldn't go very many places. My life was shut down other than that. So it was a good thing in a way. It focused my attention on the research for this book. And I am coming out with another book, which is fiction. It's future science fiction, hard fiction, and it springs off of this first book. So, and that's all about developing societies in space. What kind of problems would we confront, and how would we resolve them?
So there was at one point you had said that you think like life in the universe, however it evolved, it would have a striking similarity with life here on Earth, like essentially being carbon based, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, like, I mean, what other similarities would you expect to see? And also, why would you expect it to be carbon based? Why couldn't it be silicon based or something else?
Carbon is a very versatile molecule. It has 4 bonding positions. Silicon does as well. Carbon's bonding positions are held closer to the nucleus, so the bonds are firmer. They're stronger. They're harder to break. So scientists don't know how many carbon-based molecules can be made, and they talk in terms of infinite. So there's a whole ton of structures that can be made using carbon as the backbone. Silicon will not form long chains. It doesn't. The bonds aren't that strong. And silicon, the element, silicone, is what we use as a rubber replacement, seals. That's alternating silicon molecules and oxygen. It bonds very well with oxygen. So it's repeating chains, silicon, oxygen, and you can make things that like sealants or spatulas to cook with, whatever. So carbon is also very prevalent in the universe, and when astronomers look out and they look at spectra of starlight coming through clouds particularly in our galaxy, because things are closer. They see organic molecules. They see precursors, even amino acids. They see precursors to nucleic acids, which are the building blocks for DNA. So those molecules form because there's a lot of UV light and other energy blasting around in outer space, and so these molecules can get the energy from that and form. So chemistry is an interesting subject in that you can predict. A chemist can. I can't, but say a physical chemist, mathematically, they can predict. They can draw a molecule on the board, on the chalkboard or whatever, and then they can predict the properties, even though maybe that molecule has never been built. So
would you expect like other similarities, like such as, like for instance, the life on another planet, would it also be composed of DNA, RNA? Would you expect things like that?
I highly suspect it would, because to carry the information for life, you need very, very complex, big, huge molecules. Now, they're the similarity. Well, it may be made of nucleic acids like our DNA, but the code and the anticode, the codon, nobody has any idea. It could be a totally different codon. But and then as life would develop, say on another planet similar to Earth, it would go through a very similar process. And for example, there are some properties that are defined by what's called convergent evolution. Mm-hmm. So eyeballs are really good things for an animal to have, to see his environment, to pursue his prey, to run away from predators and so forth. So an octopus has eyeballs that are, they see different wavelengths of light differently because they live in the ocean, but they evolved completely differently than human eyeballs. And in some ways, they're even better. So
are those other similarities would you expect? Like, for instance, like would they, like life on other planets, would it also have eyeballs? Would they have brains?
Yeah.
Would you expect things like that?
I would.
Because so my understanding is, like, because I guess when we think about life here, it came about as a result of very specific selection pressures that I think would be unique to Earth. Or maybe there are a lot of other Earth-like planets with very similar selective pressures.
Well, I would couch that with saying we're talking about simple life here. We're talking about microbes, bacteria,
gotcha,
things like that. So the higher you get on the evolutionary chain, the more differences or less likelihood we would find, say, another person on another planet. Not very likely. But we would probably find microbes, and we would find plants, because you need, well, you can have plants without animals, but if you have a lot of plants, it begs the question, here's a huge food supply. I think I'll be an animal. There's a lot to eat out there. Mm-hmm. So and I truly believe that life began in the seas, and a lot of scientists believe that. And it had to do with plate tectonics and black smokers, which are tubes of mineral deposits that form in these fissures that are between the continents. For example, there's a mid-Atlantic ridge that goes. That's why South America, the Americas, and Europe and Africa are moving apart. That's why Iceland the volcanoes are going off. They have hot springs. They have the Blue Lagoon, which is heated, because they sit over that fissure, and they get heat from inside the Earth. So that would be a common thing in a planet formation, that it would have those features, and the black smokers produce hydrogen sulfide and different things at a high temperature, and that means there's an energy gradient. So there's a place where where these molecules could self-assemble. And some people's belief, because nobody was there to see it, but some people's belief is that the DNA and RNA that formed were actually driven from proteins. Proteins came first, and then they templated to the DNA. So, yeah, at that level, I think it's quite common in the Milky Way and our galaxy, and throughout the universe.
Would you
But
expect to see like complex life? Like, how complex do you think life could get on an alien planet? Like, would you expect to see, like, you know, there's been talks of people seeing Dyson spheres, all right? And so that's a pretty advanced, you know,
well,
type of life. You know, it's like they ain't talking about like a civilization. Like, do you think there's things like that out there?
well, I'm not going to rule it out because nobody knows. The universe is a very huge place. Our solar system is only 4.8 billion years old. Universe is, well, now there's some controversy. It's maybe 18 billion, it may be 27 billion years old. So they had some new information. So it's a little bit in flux, but it's very old. So if it only took us, 4.5, 4.8, probably 4.5 billion years to evolve to where we are today, it's hard to say that couldn't have happened elsewhere, and maybe long ago, like in Star Wars, a long time ago, far away. But I have some issues with that, in that there are very specific circumstances that exist on this planet that could be unique, or at least rare, and that
Like
is that the Earth is denser than it should be. It has more radioactive activity in its core than it should have. It is denser than Mercury. So as the planet's orbits are further out from the sun, they become less and less dense. It makes sense because the solar system was gravitationally formed. So the rocky planets, there are 4 of them, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. And then you have the asteroid belt, which was probably a couple of planets. They're rocky as well. And beyond that are the gas giants. So astronomers don't know a lot about how solar systems, form, and they're finding out all kinds of interesting things when we look at extrasolar planets. But this situation here, where Earth is denser than Mercury, is a very unique situation, and it has kept the tectonic plate activity going, and to this day, kept the fact that we have a dynamo that creates our magnetosphere, that deflects a lot of radiation, and Mars doesn't have a a magnetosphere. It doesn't have that capability. Neither does Venus. Venus has a sort of, it's a different situation, and I don't fully understand it. But it doesn't have
a little bit. So we're gonna have in a few weeks or so, we're gonna have a guy coming on. He, you're an expert on climate science. We have a guy coming on who's a total denial of climate change. I'm not sure if his position is that the Earth isn't undergoing any sort of climate change at all, or that humans aren't causing it. So I like to get your opinion on that.
Well, they know that CO2, the CO2 molecule, traps infrared radiation. So you have 3 methods of dispersing heat. So one is radiation, which is usually infrared rays. And if you've ever been in front of an infrared heater, your skin feels very warm. But the air isn't. It doesn't heat the air. It heats solid objects. And so CO2 in the atmosphere blocks traps the heat on the Earth. Now, the CO2 levels in the past were very much higher than they are today. And that may seem surprising, except the sun was putting out maybe 30% less energy. So we will continue to warm because the core of the sun is expanding, and the sun is gradually putting out more energy as time goes by. Now we're talking billions of years until it becomes a red giant,
It consumes Earth and everything.
Yeah, we won't be here for sure.
Is there anything that we can do to change it? Like,
Yeah, there definitely is. So to finish the thought, though, on
Mhm.
the radiation, and the reason for the skepticism, I think, is that it's very hard to sense that in everyday experience. You know, you may have a very cold winter, you may have tons of snow, and it's very difficult to measure planet warming. They take measurements at specific places around the globe at specific times, and they compare that to the history, and they keep records, and they can tell what the average temperature has increased. So it is caused by elevating concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere and other things like methane. And it's also caused by the increased output from the sun. We can't do anything about that.
Mhm.
That's going to continue to happen. So we can differentiate the CO2 that's origin is fossil fuels. We can differentiate that CO2 from the CO2 that's burped up in volcanoes. And that's another source of CO2, because that CO2
It's a different isotope, right?
it's a different isotope. So
Yeah.
it comes from shellfish that were on the bottom of the sea. They died, they went to the bottom, or they lived there. And then through plate subversion, they went down into the Earth's mantle, and the calcium carbonate was hooked, releasing CO2, and then it bubbles up occasionally through volcanoes. That has a different signature, so the scientists can differentiate what the source is.
Is there a policy that you would recommend that we could do to alter the course?
Yeah, there's a number of things we could do, and none of them are easy, because you're talking about society. So first of all, everybody has a carbon footprint. We live in this country. We probably have the largest carbon footprint of any society in the world. And the richer you are, you know, flying around in private jets, you have a very large carbon footprint. So that's one thing. And the world population is about twice what I believe is sustainable long term on this planet. And the reason is because we're using exploitive farming to feed the world. So what we're doing is we're using herbicides, insecticides, fungicides on our potato crops and wheat, and we're making bioengineered crops that produce those things to get a better output of food. What that does is it kills the soil. So there's dirt. Dirt is a powder. Soil has tons of organic matter. It has all kinds of microbes, worms, fungi, all kinds of living things that are essential to support life above the ground. It also is a huge carbon sink. So all of these life forms underground take up a lot of carbon. So the answer there would be to cut back on corporate farming, but you can't do that until you start reducing the world population, the dependency on that, and start replacing farmlands with natural habitats, be it forest or whatever it was before, and help to bring back or slow down extinctions of the species that are dying out now.
What do you do about people who are just, and I'm sorry, Fasad, I'll let you take over. I'll be back in just a few minutes. I just gotta handle something real quick. Hey Fasad, I don't think anybody can hear you.
I'm muted because I had like a loud noise going on in the background. My bad.
Yeah.
So we got part of a question.
The mics on the presidential debates.
That'd be a good idea, at least for most of the candidates. So it looks like we got part of a question in chat. Joe, if you can post the other half of it, I think the issue you were having, looks like is there's a character limit when you post a comment in live chat on YouTube, so you can post it in a couple question or sections if you want to, and I'll get that to Mr. Anderson here. In the meantime, if it's okay with you, maybe we can shift gears just a little bit. I know you you have a book about the evolution of life. Do you think there are specific steps humans will need to take? I know you said you don't think it's likely that we'll ever do things like develop the moon, but do you think Elon Musk is completely off his rocker for trying to maybe develop Mars?
Well, I do have a second book. Like I say, it's future fiction, and it discusses all of this stuff, space settlements, and it'll be out in February, I think that's the estimate, and it's called Outbound, Islands in the Void. And I'm starting my third book, which is Outbound, Mars Ascension. So it'll be talking about Mars. But Outbound, Islands in the Void is about developing what are called O'Neill cylinders. So Dr. O'Neill lived in the 70s. He developed a lot of ideas, and one of them were these large tin cans that maybe had a diameter of a couple of kilometers or 3 kilometers, maybe 20 kilometers long. And they rotated such that you could be on the inside of the cylinders and you would experience one gravity, which is also referred to as standard gravity. And then you could bring in environments. You couldn't, that's a huge area, a huge volume. You couldn't support it mechanically. You would need to bring in all kinds of life forms. And you would use the resources not from Earth launch, because that's not sustainable. It's so expensive. You would use resources in the asteroid belt, for example. And you would use resources, and in this book I have NASA South Pole, lunar South Pole base, and LSP, NASA LSP, and they are mining the South Pole of the moon, and then they're using mass drivers, which are linear motors, electromagnetic motors that can accelerate mass to a very high speed. And because the moon gravity is about 1/6 of Earth, they would work very well on the moon, and you just target those things to launch into lunar orbit, and then you just pick them up with your spaceships, your robotic spaceships. You bring them to a site. In this case, it's L5, which is Lagrangian point. It's a gravity balance point between the Earth and the moon, and there are similar sites like that between the Earth and the Sun.
Yeah, that's where we've launched like several satellites, correct?
Yeah, so it requires little energy to maintain your position in an L5 or an L4 position. So you would build the island there, and then you would build a manufacturing facility, and you would have someone out in the asteroid belt living on a ramp orbiting in their island around Ceres, which is a planetoid, and they would be shipping material. So the asteroid, into lunar orbit around the Earth, and then you would build your stations. You would build your islands from the materials there out in space. And so you save that makes it possible. So the technology is, I would guess, mostly there. I mean, we probably have most of the capability of doing something like that. And in this book, it happens 250 years in the future. Gotcha. So I don't think it's imminent. It's not going to happen real fast. What Elon Musk is talking about is, I'm not sure that when he first started talking about this, that he had really investigated the biological side. Mars is a very dangerous place. The aside from being having 1% of Earth's atmosphere, the soil, the dust, and their microparticles, they're like a powder because of that light atmosphere. When they have a dust storm, it can't pick up very large particles. You would hardly feel a 60-mile-an-hour wind on Mars because there's so little air there. And the other thing about the surface and this dust is there hasn't been erosion. So erosion rubs things together. So they're probably pretty sharp edged like they are on the moon. They would stick to your clothes and, your gloves, they'd get into mechanical mechanisms. They would cause havoc. And the other thing is they're loaded with chlorates and perchlorates, which are toxic to living things, damage DNA and so forth. So you want to remove those from whatever soil you would use, and there are ways of doing that. But he's not going to fly up there in a spaceship, and there's nothing to receive you there. The other problem is, and I think NASA is looking at this now, is you have to create a gravity. You have to have a rotating ship. If you're going to make a trip that's 7 to 9 months round trip before the planets align, would be, you're talking about 2 years minimum. And if your ship is not creating the equivalent of one gravity or standard gravity, your bones are going to degenerate, your head will swell, your brain, you have problems there. They've done these studies in the space station, and then they've determined what all the causes, what all the changes are. And they so by the time you got to Mars 7 months, 9 months later in microgravity, and now you're going to land on the planet. By the way, the parachute is not going to slow you down enough because there's not much atmosphere. So your retro rockets better work really well. So this is one of the things that Musk has done well. He's the first to re-land and reuse his rockets. But you're going to get out of your spaceship. You're going to have this big spacesuit on, and you're hardly going to be able to stand. So maybe they could send some recliner chairs there and put them down at the landing site before we arrive, and then people could sit down until they, acclimatize to it. But I'm being facetious, of course. But that's something I think NASA has not really come out and said how they're going to do it. I have read something where they're looking at a rotating, a rotating spaceship. So in my book, all the spaceships rotate. They all create one gravity because to get to the asteroid belt, now Mars is 7 to 9 months. The asteroid belt, if you're going to Sirius, it depends on the position of Sirius. I think it rotates, the Earth, the 4 Earth years to 1 Sirius year. I'm not sure my memory is right. So you'd have to wait for the position to be right, and then you're going to be sitting out there traveling for 2 or 3 years in a very confined space. So now we're going to select humans that are going to want to do that. And we can't look to the Mercury 7 or the Apollo astronauts. Those guys were they wanted to do it so badly they wouldn't complain about anything. They would put up with everything. The average person wouldn't fly in orbit like Alan Shepard with a rectal thermometer up his rear end to measure body temperature. Rather uncomfortable, and they changed that later. But they put them through a lot to screen people who were super healthy. The astronauts were also they were small men, small women. Because you're looking at weight is a big issue on these trips. So I would say that Elon Musk is impulsive in what he says. He's shown a history of that. So when he wants to, and he has said he wants to die on Mars, just not on impact.
Well, he might get his wish, but maybe not in the second half. So we had a question in chat. If you don't mind addressing it, it's a little long and it's broken up into a couple pieces. So I'm going to try getting through all of it. It says current culture seems to be obsessed with the idea of the crisis. That's in quotation marks, of global warming. However, we know that the Earth was inhabitable 330 million years ago in the Carboniferous period, with oxygen levels at, let's see, where does that, our current rate, and sorry, it's not in order, our current rate, here, I'll just blow this up so I can see it. So oxygen levels at our current rate, and our carbon at 2,000 parts per million. We currently sit at 400 parts per million, 5 times the amount. Given this fact, isn't global cooling much more of a dangerous threat to humanity? Global cooling, which has led to starvation in our history and a reduction of plant life and crop yields. Am I to understand that the difference in isotopes equates to difference in greenhouse effect, or regardless of isotope, do we get the same effect?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with the isotopes. What I mentioned before is when we talk about millions of years ago or a billion years ago, there was a very high concentration of CO2. The whole planet was pretty swampy. We would consider it to be tropical or subtropical. The reason is the sun output, it was hugely different. And so we have two things going on. Our CO2 level is much lower than it was at that time. And so the difference is not caused by the CO2, it's caused by the sun's output. So as the fusion reaction goes, there's a sphere inside the sun. There's an interface at this sphere where hydrogen is on the outside, helium is on the inside. So as hydrogen fuses to form helium, of course, the sphere increases in diameter. And the surface area increases. So you have a huge surface area of this reaction going on, putting out all this energy. So that's the driving force that is going to cause our sun ultimately to expand, become a red giant. It will expand out to somewhere around Earth's orbit, and then it will collapse into a white dwarf when it burns through all of the energy. So that's, they've measured temperatures on Mars with this little atmosphere, and it's a little bit, they've detected that it is warming a little bit. And that is because the same reason, the sun is putting out more energy. So my thing is the future of humans or all life in this solar system will not last unless we start moving away from the sun. And that's where I'm thinking these islands that are in space, they could move. It'd be really hard to move a planet. I'm not sure how you would do that, but these islands you could move. You could move them, and they wouldn't have to move very fast. You just gradually you just gradually accelerate them, and they automatically go to a higher orbit. That's what orbits are about. So if we did have islands out there, when the sun reached, started expanding, we could probably survive. We could probably move far enough away where we would survive. And then, of course, when it became a white dwarf, we'd come rushing back to be close enough to get some energy. And as a white dwarf, it would burn for billions of years. That answer the question?
I'll leave that to the guy who asked to decide. Joseph, hopefully that clarified things. If not, maybe you can try again. But sorry, they weren't in order. But we did have another question in from a guy named Jesse. He's a good friend of mine. He's currently studying his PhD in history. He asked, are you concerned about the fact SpaceX, one company or one man, ostensibly is responsible for about 80% of all payloads going into orbit currently? Should we be weary of a monopolistic space exploration?
Absolutely. That's where we're getting into the politics of space. So you have some players coming into the field. You have the private enterprise, which is mainly focused in this country. You have China coming up. You have India launching things. You have everybody is looking at this is something that's going to happen. I mean, all the countries are that are able to. They want to, in some ways, stake their claim, whatever, have a presence. So it's not going to work in that. Well, I don't feel it's going to work in that way. You can't have the same kind of government, and you can't have the same kind of economics if you have a separate civilization in space. I can't imagine having corporations that are shareholder owned, maybe employee owned. I can't imagine. Well, first of all, what is your status? How do you achieve status in these kinds of environments in space islands? You can't have a mega mansion, and you can't have a yacht, and probably not even your own spaceship. So then what gives you status? And I would propose that your standing in society, your contribution to society and to the advancement of your culture would improve your status and standing, and maybe give you some special tickets to a nice restaurant or something. It's going to be a whole different thing. What we have now with politics wouldn't work in space. For example, you couldn't have an inactive or dysfunctional governing body. So my feeling is you would have to have a lot of the same elements. But for example, for a court system, for a legal system, you would probably have something like judges would be nominated by their peers to a higher position. Supreme Court, and I think you'd need a Supreme Court. Somebody has to have the final say on things. Those people will be nominated in the same manner. In other words, if you were an attorney, you wanted to become a judge, and you proved yourself and your peers appreciated that, you could move up and eventually possibly be appointed to the Supreme Court. But you wouldn't be appointed by a politician. So science, they have a committee in Congress. They hire scientists to talk to them about implications of different things. But the scientists have no power. So my thinking is you would have the executive branch, you would have the court system, the judicial, and you would have an elective body that would represent the various islands in this culture. And you would have a fourth one, which would be an association of sciences. Engineers, scientists of all walks of life, and I include in that psychologists and sociologists, so that they would have a vote. Congress is going to pass something. The executive body is going to propose something. It would have to clear these other functions, so that you don't do something stupid because you don't have room for error. There's been plenty of error on our planet. We've done a lot of things wrong, but the planet is big, and it can absorb a lot of that. It buffers a lot of abuse. These space islands would not. For example, you couldn't go out and down by the lake, say you had a small lake in one of these islands, you couldn't go down there and start a campfire. Well, you have a very small atmosphere, and that's gonna have a big impact. You don't have the huge volume of air. So in a small environment with a lot of people, there would be environmentalists, there would be scientists who control how this mechanically and biologically, how these islands were maintained, and they would make the decision, not politicians. So it kind of irks me in today's world when politicians or the courts, because I have a medical background also, but when they make determinations that should be in the realm of medicine, and so they're making decisions on things that they don't understand. So they're out of their water. So that kind of a problem could not exist and have a successful space colony. So that if that developed in space, it would be a template to come back and fix Earth. And so in my new book that's coming out, I have Earth is pretty much a dystopia. And we have a lot of global warming. There's been a lot of damage. There's a lot of the countries have fallen apart. There's gangs and militias. We can kind of see that. There's immigration from tropical areas toward the poles. We can already see that. A lot of that is due to politics. They're coming from a country where they're abused. But we can add climate to that and say when it becomes uninhabitable in their own country, populations are going to move away, and they're going to encroach on the populations that are in, say, Canada or Northern Europe or Patagonia in South America. Unfortunately, India and Africa do not extend far enough south. They have nowhere to go except north. They can't go south. Well, I address some of those issues in my new novel, but so Earth is a dystopia, and there are a lot of people who are working to try and correct things. And so that's what this new book is about, because whether we survive or not, nobody can, long term, nobody can really say. But we can look at ourselves and see the problems that we're facing right now, and that we have to overcome, because long term we can't survive. So unless we solve some of these things.
So one of my main concerns was that, a lot of the things that we were doing in the 20th century that that was able to help us, make so many advancements technologically, they were also really bad for the environment.
Yeah.
So, and now there's a lot of other parts of the planet. Now they're just hitting that industrial age. And for now that we know that this is problematic, it seems to me that we're in a moral dilemma. Well, right? Because now we have places like in Africa right now, they're just hitting that industrial revolution, and we're going to have to put a stop on it. And that's going to be impacting lives. That's going to be impacting the level of education, healthcare, all the type of advancements that we benefit here in our first world country. It seems like they're going to be robbed of, because
that's a conundrum. So they point out that Western civilization went out, polluted, caused genocide, did all these horrible things, advanced themselves, advanced their technology, and damaged the planet. We in the United States, we cut down forests. We did genocide with the Native Americans. A lot of bad things. So these third world countries that didn't come into their own when we were doing that, when basically Western civilization was doing that, and was happening in India when England was in charge there. They're saying, well, now it's our turn. We've already So I see the argument. That's a big problem. So ethically and morally, we can't say, okay, you guys go out and do what we did. It was really bad, and that's going to probably put us over a tipping point. However, I think we have an obligation because of that, because we got our wealth at a lot of their expense. Take Pacific Islanders, for example. Some of those islands are going to be underwater because of our actions, not their actions. So I think we have an obligation to help these countries out. And, what I think is probably not going to happen to any great extent, but I think that's where our moral compass should be directed to.
What type of form should I take? Like how could we help them? Because charity isn't really long term. Like we need to be teaching skills and
I think
developing economies.
Exactly. I think
I was going to ask, would there be a way to turn like a third world country? Like it would be a way to skip past the industrial stage, the jump, right from maybe like a very poor society, jump straight into like coding, making like more technologically based economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the first things you do is you take people who are very have not much technology, and you help those countries and those rural populations out in teaching them organic farming techniques and bringing technology for clean water, bring technology, solar panels to give them power, connecting them to the internet, which can connect them to knowledge, can connect them to universities, can give them a contact point with the best of what we have to offer. And one of the things that I think would be valuable about islands in space and manufacturing in space is you do all the hardcore stuff out there where you're not polluting, and then you have a glider. You make those in a re-entry glider, and you make those in outer space. You make those at L5. And you load them up with the materials you've made out in space, and it re-enters. Now, the space shuttle re-entered with no power. It glided in. So you can do the same thing. I'll show you a picture.
Okay. Also, too,
so this is, so these, you see one in the background, and here's a glider coming in.
That's from your new book?
Yeah. So this is Outbound Islands in the Void. So the idea is you have these robotic rocket motors that attach to your glider, put it in position, retrofire to get it into a re-entry trajectory, and then detach and go back, and they're refueled and whatever, and you reuse. But they don't, and so you send this ship down. It's a one-way trip. It doesn't require a lot of energy, right? It requires a ton of energy to get up there. But if you're bringing material down to Earth, it's negligible. You're going to glide in and land on a runway like the space shuttle did. So, and they wouldn't have to be.
There was a question in the chat that I like to clarify. I guess there's some confusion on when you were talking about how CO2 levels is trapping infrared radiation, therefore increasing heat. You were saying so that you made the point that, well, I don't think I was here. I think I was sending it to my daughter at the time, but at some point you hadn't said that the CO2, regardless of its isotope, is trapping heat within the Earth, right?
Right.
And so were you saying that it doesn't matter what humans are doing?
No, I'm saying it matters even more than most people realize, because at the same time that we're trapping more heat, the sun is putting out more energy. So we have two things that are adding to global warming. and it was going
So
to
you-
happen.
So you have the natural isotopes of CO2 that produced from volcanoes, etc. And then
right,
you also have us that's compounding the problem.
right, and then you have
Okay.
the global warming it's called a positive feedback mechanism. So there's another factor here as the planet gets warmer, the permafrost and in the Arctic, it starts to warm, and the peat bogs in, say, Ireland and the northern Scandinavian countries, they start to warm and they start to ferment, and they release methane, and methane's about 80 times what as strong as CO2 as far as trapping infrared radiation. So we have methane, and then our farming techniques, our farming culture, cows and pigs and all of the animals that we raise, they produce a lot of methane, and they produce a lot of manure that then ferments and releases methane. So that's 80 times stronger than CO2. So CO2 is not the only problem as far as the heat. So essentially,
you say like the methane, you said that's 80 times stronger than the CO2. So like you mean like 80 times more efficient at trapping heat within the atmosphere.
Right.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and by the way, like that's where like one of the biggest cases for veganism, even if you're not like a vegan, just to eradicate the use of cow farming, because the amount of methane cows produce is just insane. Like in the same amount of space, you could grow crops in that land 3 times faster with a tenth of the water, and not produce any methane.
Yeah, there's I like my meat. I don't eat a lot.
Wasn't an argument for veganism, just throwing out there the fact that methane is a huge problem.
But I don't eat a lot of it. I very occasionally, and I try to go plant forward, so it's not vegan or vegetarian. I emphasize a plant diet, supplement with a little maybe fish or steak once in a while. I don't go to fast food, although French fries they call me, but I don't go to McDonald's or any fast food. All the hamburgers. Can you imagine how many cows that involves? Yeah. So cows are also very inefficient. You take a lot of water and a lot of feed to translate that up to a pound of beef. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know it's a lot. And so one of the things that can be done is now GMO foods or GMO development. It's not a bad thing theoretically. Mm-hmm. It could be a very good thing, but who's paying for the development? So if the seed companies, if the agricultural companies, big ag is making genetically engineering these seeds to produce plants that produce pesticides, that produce herbicides. We have bee colony collapse, and people say they don't know why. I think I have an idea why. But that can be done. Very good things can be done with that genetic engineering. And one thing that came out was something called golden rice. So a lot of South Asian countries, a lot of the world, Pacific Islanders, a lot of the world, their basic bulk food is rice. But rice, even whole grain, lacks significant nutrients. It has the calories. So they can engineer this, and they put the things in, or the actual plant grows the things that are missing, and it's called golden rice. So they can eat this, and it grows just like regular rice, doesn't require any more. So that's a positive thing. Another thing, you have a push.
Yeah, so like our chat is like blowing up, and so like I hate to take you back to the global warming thing, but they're asking a lot about that. So first, before I go into the chat, I just want to make sure I can get a still man. So because the last question was, why make a distinction if carbon is bad regardless of isotope, and the amount we can control is so marginal. So my understanding was that you were saying so natural occurring CO2 and man-caused CO2 are both problematic.
Right.
And so you were saying that we can make policies to control the human caused CO2.
Right.
Okay. And then that would help us a little bit in the long run, right? And so it wouldn't completely fix the problem. We can't fix everything. We can't fix all CO2. We can't stop the sun from getting hotter. But we can reduce the problems that we're causing.
Absolutely.
Okay, so, that was your argument.
Yeah. So, it would be pretty difficult to shut down volcanoes.
Right.
There
was a question in the chat I wanted to ask.
Okay.
So after that, I just want to make sure I have a good stillman of what you're saying. Now, he says our current crisis is not a crisis. He says global cooling would yield much greater casualties. So what are your thoughts on global cooling? Is that a thing? I'll tell you, like the research that I'd done into this was that this was from like a single paper in like the 70s where they thought global cooling was like actually a thing, but it was debunked a little bit after.
Well, you could have there were mass extinctions in geologic history caused by global cooling. And
what about now though? How reasonable is the idea that right now the Earth is actually getting cooler?
It's not happening, and it won't happen if we have a nuclear holocaust, a nuclear war with all then we're going to have what's called the nuclear winter. Yes, then we'll have global cooling. When the asteroid that came 65 million years ago, the asteroid that collided off the Yucatan Peninsula and caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. What happened in that situation is that as this asteroid penetrated the mantle of the Earth, it hit a huge sulfur deposit, and it caused a massive explosion. The skies were on fire. Everything burned. The plants burned. So the dinosaurs didn't have anything to eat. And the small little rodents that ultimately became us, the little mammals that ran around, they probably snacked on the cooked dinosaurs and other things, and they survived. But after the devastation and the heat, we had global cooling at that point too, because this massive debris that was thrown up into the stratosphere caused global cooling. Okay, so a cataclysmic event like that, or there's a volcano down in the South Pacific that is a huge volcano. If that erupted, it could probably cause global cooling for a while. Yellowstone is one of the biggest. There's a biggest caldera under Yellowstone National Park. If that ever blew, it would take the debris would go eastward, but it would then circle the globe, would probably cause a global cooling. So these events could happen, and it could lead to global cooling, but that's it. I don't see any other way where you can cool. We're sitting next to a sun that's getting hotter. We're producing more and more CO2 and methane that is trapping the heat, a lot of the heat that we're getting. Our oceans are warming, and one of the problems, or one of the properties of water, is it gives up temperature very slowly. It retains heat. So say we corrected the global warming today, it would take probably a couple of centuries to get to cool the Earth to what it was 100 years ago, because the oceans would continue to be warm, and it would take them that long to cool down. So this last summer, the water off of Florida, down to about a foot or two below the surface, reached 100 degrees. That's a spa. Can you imagine? A fish swims up to get a gasp of air, and it's like, holy cow, I'm cooking here. That's
I like to
amazing.
address like another point in the chat. He's asking, and if and Joseph, if I'm getting this wrong, correct me. But it sounds like he's saying that he wants to ask you, Dr. Anderson, is that more CO2, since plants breathe CO2, it would produce more plants and therefore more food, and would therefore be beneficial to humanity.
Absolutely. That's one of the proposals is, okay, reforestation would be one thing, getting away from corporate type farming, exploitive farming, where
Mhm.
you
I think
reestablish the soil.
I think you misunderstood me. So I think he's arguing that global warming would be a good thing because since that would be more air for plants to breathe. That's what he's asking. I think that's the point he's making.
Okay. Earth is do you know what a buffer is? Okay, Earth has buffering capabilities. So when it goes, a buffer is when the environment changes too much, there's a force that comes in that starts to swing it back toward its nominal situation. So in chemistry, a buffer is to keep the acid-base balance at a certain pH. You put a buffer in there, so if it changes a little bit one way or the buffer brings it back to what you want it. So that's what's happening. That's what's happening with the higher CO2. It does support plant growth, but what we're doing is we're burning down the Amazon. We're taking down forests all over the world, and so that adds CO2 without the plants there to take it up. And so India has a reforestation program, and it has per land area. It has probably one of the most largest areas of forest, and they keep planting, and they're trying to increase the forest. The problem is you have a lot of poverty in India, and people, what they do, they need heat. They cut down the newly planted trees and they burn them. So in the Amazon, the same idea that farmers are going in there, they're burning the jungle, they're planting soybeans, but the soil is very poor. So in the process of burning, they're adding CO2 to the atmosphere, and then they're putting in a crop that doesn't replace what was there before as far as a carbon sink. So Amazon was historically one of the largest carbon sinks in the world. Now it isn't. So yeah, plants are hugely important, and believe me, there's enough CO2 to support a huge plant population. And by the way, I'm getting an echo.
Yeah, I'm not sure what. I hear an echo as well. Well, now it's gone.
Yeah.
So, and this is something that I hadn't thought about before. So, because I mean, when people planted trees and stuff, I just thought, it's good have another tree because now the squirrel can live in it. I wasn't thinking about the fact that the plants are actually absorbing the CO2 and reducing the amount of heat. So, what do you think about, like, you're familiar with, I guess, what China is doing in the, I think it's the China Sea, the island building, right? They're taking, so like, what about the idea of island building, right? So taking dirt from deep part of the sea and put it in more shallow parts, building an island, planting trees there. Like, is that a viable option? Could you do something like that?
Yeah, that's not what they're doing, but they're using.
Yeah, I know, right. It's much more political, nefarious.
So it's interesting. In my new book, one of the things that is that I use are islands that float. Okay, and they can float to an area that is more pleasant to live in. In other words, they can float away from, especially in the southern hemisphere, because it's mostly ocean in the southern hemisphere until you get to Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you could set up farms, and you could set up all these things on these floating islands, and you could grow certain types of food with using microbes. And this is genetic engineering. You could make hamburgers. You can make a lot of different things because we have the technology now to start doing these things. So yeah, definitely you could any land area that you put back into a natural environment, it's an environment for other animals. And we have, here's a moral argument again. Our age is called the Anthropocene, and it means we're in a mass extinction era caused by humans. So it's another bad thing we're doing. And but by restoring natural habitats, we can reverse some of that. We've lost, once a species is lost, it's lost. Not a hard fact. There is a possibility to bring some of them back, but with our biotechnology. So
I've run into this a lot. So I mean, I don't know like what your religious views are. I don't care. Like, I mean, we're both atheists. What I run into a lot is I have a friend, and we talk about, restoring the environment, right? And saving her for future generations. I have a friend who has sentiments that there's really no need for society to do anything because Jesus is going to take care of it, essentially.
Yeah, it's God's plan. We don't interfere.
Right. What do you do with that type of argument? Because it's very persuasive. Maybe to from the outside looking in, we're thinking this is lunacy, but for a person that actually hold these views, that can be very strong belief that God is in total control, and so there's no need for us to do it, or that Jesus is going to come back and set the world ablaze anyway. So
it's religion's a funny thing. I discuss it a little bit in my book where religion was a seed of societies. So when you have a cave society or a tribal society, once you get beyond 100 people or 150 people, you cannot know everybody in your tribe. You cannot personally know them to trust them. So you need a common belief. And this is where religion, superstition, whatever it was, came in, and it was a seed for a society to form. Okay, here's a bunch of people that get together. I know we all believe the same thing, but another society forms somewhere else, and they believe something else because none of it is factually based. It's just, it's a danger. It's a huge danger, and it's a very, I don't know what the answer is, because the type of worldview that would accept an idea with no evidence to support it, and a religious person will argue that because they will say, well, I had this experience, I had this whatever happened, I had a near-death experience that's been used.
Mm-hmm.
Out-of-body experience. There have been some studies done that basically debunk that. And when you really look into religions, a lot of the core belief is preposterous, and then why. So there's a, and I'll use an example that it won't offend anybody because there is no one of this religion alive today. But in the Southwest, there was an Indian Native American culture that grew up in the canyons where the rivers, the water supply came through the canyon, but it had high cliffs and everything, and they have cliff dwellings in these places. And they're for protection, You know, you can. It's hard to get up there. You have a ladder. You can pull the ladder up. If anybody invades, they have trouble getting up there. The population expanded and expanded, and they had some good years of rainfall, and a lot of the extra population moved out onto the plateau above the canyon, moved out into away from the center of their culture, and that was the religious center of their culture as well. And they would come back and they would pay tribute. They would have their ceremonies. They would bring their some of their produce or whatever their taxes were to support the culture and to support the priests or whatever their shaman were. And that was to keep the rain coming, to keep their crops growing, and all of that, because these priest or shaman had a direct link to their god and could control the environment. Now they went into a period of time of drought, and so years, and so their culture started. Their farms were failing and everything. They started coming back into this canyon, and the belief is that they came in and they massacred the priest, because the priest had been disfavored by the god, and that's why their farms died. That's why they didn't get any rain. So the society disappeared, and the surviving members probably went to other, you know, the Maya or other groups. So there's no continuation of that society. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
As long as the religion can make you believe that they can work in your behalf to this deity, people will follow it. And of course, some churches will say you have to access God or Jesus or somebody through us. You can't do it on your own. You need us. So
you raise a great point when we're talking about how, like you said, that the religion destroyed their society because of the beliefs. Yeah. You know, so you're familiar with the Kardashev scale. You know, the types of civilizations based on how much energy they're able to consume. You know, like type 1 is able to consume all the energy on the Earth, and type 2 is able to consume all of this in the solar system.
Oh yeah, I haven't read about it for a long time, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. So like, my theory is that there's actually an invisible ceiling that prevents societies, civilizations, in general, from elevating to a certain level. And this is why I would think we wouldn't see many alien civilizations. And I think our morals are that invisible ceiling. Think about this. So like, as technology produces, as technology increases, so does our capacity to destroy.
Oh, absolutely. Our power.
Right. Yeah. And so now we talk about with that capacity to destroy, it's going to take a level of morality that's capable of developing it safely. And we think about, like, for instance, like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bible, with the God who was telling to the Israel, hey, go and just murder this entire civilization. So like, civilizations like that, like a type of society like that, would never be able to, you know, develop interstellar travel, because they would get that technology, and what would they do? They destroy each other. That'd be the end of society. And so I guess what I'm asking is, do you agree? Do you think that is a barrier for us right now, that type of religious thinking that kind of stop us from developing good morals?
Well, it's definitely a force. You know, it's definitely a force. And when I would say, I will take the liberty of saying, when a rational person is trying to talk to somebody who is a religious fanatic, and by that I mean someone who believes in very specific things and very intently. You can be religious and believe that in a general way, there may be a higher being or something like that. But when you get to the point where you're abdicating your life to some imaginary being, that gets pretty serious. And I've met people like that. And I had friends in high school who kind of went off that deep end, in my opinion. And I thought they were going to kind of see the light eventually, but no, it's a specific worldview. Now, it may be because there are
would that worldview stop us from producing the type of society that you're describing in your next book?
Well, it could, but I think there's enough people who don't have that worldview. I think they're very vocal right now, but I don't think they're a huge majority. And I look to the leaders of society. What's going to bring us into the future are not the religious people, but they could hold us back from getting to the future. So, but I think there are enough. I use the word rational again, implying that deeply religious people are irrational, but that's my perspective. It's a frustration. It really is a frustration because you cannot have a discussion about any part of their beliefs because there's nothing to discuss in a rational way. It's like you either believe it or you don't. And their reference point is whatever holy text or whatever documents that they have in their religion, and they say that's the basis for what I believe. And then you have the Bible, you have the Quran, you have the Bhagavad Gita, you have all kinds of documents that the Book of Mormon, that tell you what the truth is, and they all point to that and say this validates my belief. It's somebody, and when you look at the history about where it came from, or like the Bible came from many, many, many different sources and was compiled over time. So, and the Old Testament God, the God of the Old Testament, reflected kings of the time, leaders of the time. I am a jealous God. I am vengeful. Not our idea of a benevolent being. And then here's the other part: is you cannot have the three things that people believe God has: is omnipotence, benevolence, and a connection to your life.
I think you're talking about the problem of evil or the problem of suffering, right? So like God being all powerful and all loving, right? Because there wouldn't be any like unnecessary suffering.
You can't be all three. You can't be a personal God caring about your life, omnipotent, and do good works. Bad things happen in this world. Why didn't God stop it? Why didn't God stop the school bus from going over the cliff?
Right. He was either powerless to stop it, which make him not omnipotent, or he didn't care to stop it, which make him not benevolent.
Right. So you can't have all. So that's I say on a positive note. Fundamental religious people are in the news, are in our presence vocally, where they were in the background in the past. But the trend in the world, in our country, and except in some theocracies, religion's on the decline, and attendance and support of religious institutions is on the decline. And religion to survive is going to have to go in the direction of sociology, psychology, self-help, whatever programs they can develop to benefit people. A lot of people who are religious are in that mode, and they're using that vehicle to, like Catholic Charities, or they're using that vehicle to do good in the world. So I don't think, and here's something about our thinking: whatever is happening in the present, we overweigh. We give it too much importance. We don't remember 20 years ago. We don't look ahead 20 years. We're in the here and now, and whatever's happening is dominating our awareness. So everything that's happening seems like it's bigger than it actually is. So there's a section in the book. It's called "The Structure of Our Thinking," and they've done some studies. It's preliminary, because when you start doing studies on the brain of a live human, you have to be very careful in a lot of respects. They have found in a pilot study by a university, they have found some deficiencies in the structure of the brain on psychopaths. So psychopaths looks to their own needs like everybody does, but they don't have the check, to come back and say, I'd really like to do this, but my God, the consequences, I can't do it, because
it's a very myopic type of selfishness.
Yeah. So the psychopath doesn't have that feedback. Mm-hmm. So they found that certain deficiencies and connections in the brain from the amygdala, which are down on the brainstem or near the brainstem on both hemispheres, they have neural connections to the prefrontal and frontal lobe, and this is where your brain says, wait a minute. Your first reaction was to take the knife and plunge it into, no, that's not gonna, let's have a discussion instead. So that's the check on and so deficiencies in the development of a brain can lead to aberrant behavior. The other thing is that structurally the brain could be fine. Chemically, it could be out of balance. So schizophrenia is believed to be a chemical imbalance, and they can treat it. They can treat it chemically, and other mental health issues can be handled chemically, because that's what caused the problem. But the structural, that's where you get the real serious problems.
I was wondering, in that same
vein, if I could.
Were you about to say, Fasad?
I was going to say, kind of in that same vein, if I could, just kind of get just kind of a short opinion on, since the whole overarching topic that we've discussed today is the future of humanity, and you were just mentioning things about the brain, what are your thoughts on things like Neuralink being a potential future of humanity and incorporating things like computer chips into humans, and, like things like bionics and whatnot? Do you think that's a possibility, a good idea, a bad idea?
It's hard to say right now because of the technology, but in my new book that comes out hopefully in February, I have a character who's totally virtual, not virtuous, virtual, and as a female, and she is implanted in the main protagonist's brain, and her name is Ophelia. And so they communicate by thoughts, and then she is connected, like to a hotspot. Wherever they go, she connects to a hotspot. And she has, we call it the data sphere, which would be like the internet, or it's all the electronic information and all the computers. We're talking 250 years in the future. So Ophelia is an implant, and she's integrated with this person's brain, and so I play with that idea. Whether it's
any reference to Shakespeare there, out of curiosity?
Any what?
Any reference to Shakespeare there? Ophelia who drives herself to madness and suicide.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. No, Oh, I'll have to look. I'll have to read Ophelia again and see.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously,
I can make a reference.
Ophelia in Shakespeare, she drove herself to madness and she committed suicide. So that would have been a very interesting thing to incorporate into someone who has a brain implant.
Yeah.
So
No, as a matter of fact, it's the other way. She eventually adjusts this person's physiology so that he doesn't age. He rebuilds his repair mechanisms stay active. One of the things that happens as we age is some of our repair mechanisms in the DNA start to shut down. The control things start to shut down, and if you could reactivate those, you get them back to where they were when you were, say, growing. The thought is that you wouldn't age. Well, anyway, I'm using that idea.
fair enough.
From a practical standpoint, I think it's definitely possible. I don't think it's imminent. There's only so much capability that we have in our brains, because it's not going to get any bigger. Our heads kind of constrain it to its present size, which, by the way, humans have the largest brain to body mass ratio of any of the animals, any of the mammals, So because an elephant has a bigger brain doesn't mean it's smarter than humans. It
Right.
has to do with the ratio of the mass. Anyway.
Triple A, you had one more question, and then last word.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
So yeah, let's just dive into like some science fiction. Like when a lot of times people we talk about, like, if we were to run into an advanced alien civilization, what would they be like? And a lot of times people think of them, and they're depicted in movies like they would come over here, invade us, slave us, or kill us all and deprive the planets of resources. Now, I tend to think that because of that invisible ceiling that I was describing earlier, which is morality, I would tend to think that these people would be a very kind, very moral civilization, because if they were that type of people, imperialist, violent people, they would have destroyed themselves far before being able to develop the technology to come visit Earth. So I would expect an advanced alien civilization to come here and be like, "Whoa, y'all still have prisons? That's crazy. Yeah, you're eating animals. They're sentient. They're suffering. Like I would expect them to be very very advanced morally. Like, I just like to know, what were your thoughts on that?
I think that's a good point. What we base the idea, well, first of all, it makes a good story. But what we base the idea is on our own history. Any culture that has come to another culture with superior technology, it has not gone well for the resident culture. And we have examples. I don't think there are any exceptions in our history. But I take your point that if you're that advanced, you've surpassed that barrier, because the ultimate achievement of an intelligence is to be cooperative, to be caring, to be ethical and moral. We don't see a lot of that present in our system today, but that would be the goal. And if you don't get to that point, so here's another thing about the space islands. It would be a highly selective program to populate these islands. In other words, you would have active brain scans. Okay, do you have any really serious deformities? You would have the ability to contribute to society. You would be socially adaptable, and there would be a lot of criteria. So you're selecting out a population to live on these islands. Now, I can see that happening. What happens with the second generation?
Mm.
You can't select who's born, or can you? So here's some thoughts. If you eliminate all toxins that we know, and say 250 years from now, we probably know more about that. During a female's gestation, so she's not contaminated with any chemicals or things that will damage the development of the fetus. The environment is right and everything, and you can do some early testing and maybe intervention if something's not quite going right. Then you can have a better handle on producing better children. When I say stuff like that, people say, "Oh, you're talking about eugenics." Well, I'm really not.
Mm.
I'm talking about you can. There was a boy, a black boy about 13. He had homozygous hemophilia. His expected lifespan was probably 20. He liked to play basketball, but he could only play for a few minutes, and then he would go into crisis because his cells would start to sickle. Causes organ damage. It does some really bad things. What they did is they took, and that's a point mutation. That's in the hemoglobin molecule. That is one base pair substitution. Most genetic anomalies are multiple points. Hemophilia is one, not hemophilia. Sickle cell is 1 point mutation. So they took some bone marrow from this boy. They took which is where your blood cells are made, your red blood cells, white blood cells too, and they grew it in culture, and they used a technique that's newly been discovered in the last 4 or 5 years. A couple of women got the Nobel Prize in chemistry for developing that, but they can go in. It's called CRISPR, and they can go in and they can cut out that mutation, and they can insert the correct base pair, and then they grow up in tissue culture, so they get a certain number of cells, and then they re-inject them in this boy's bone marrow. Now he still has sickle cell and he's still homozygous, but now he has cells, he has the precursors to cells that will produce normal cells. So he's more like heterozygous. So he's going to be able to play basketball. He's going to live a lot longer life. And that was one case of genetic engineering that was done and successfully. So I can see a future where more of that could be done to correct anomalies, to correct some DNA problems. That technology was found in an E. coli bacteria that used it as a means of immunology. It doesn't have an immunological system. It's a bacteria to resist phages. Phages are bacterial viruses. So the phage would come in. It developed this thing where it could sever the phage DNA, and the phage couldn't reproduce, and therefore it protected the bacteria. That was discovered in a bacteria that had existed for millions of years. So if we lose all the plants in the Amazon that may have medical benefits, we lose a lot of our microbes. They carry secrets that we don't know, but we know there's a potential. They have evolved as long as we have evolved. Well, I mean, we have evolved as long as they have evolved. So I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel, if we get to that point, that we can fix some problems in our physique and our way of thinking. So
all right, well,
we will be our own big brother.
His daughter is actually getting sicker, and we're at our time anyway. So I wanted to give you last word of the show, but first I wanted to thank you so much for coming on. Triple A, I know you got to go for your daughter, so
Yeah. Also, yeah, I gotta go. Also, I wanted to apologize for me hopping in and out the podcast. That's what's going on. My daughter has RSV, and so I was trying to handle that.
Oh, good. Oh.
Yeah. But I really appreciate you for coming on the show, and we'll have to have you back on again sometime, especially after you finish that book. We'll have to have you back on.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun.
See you, Triple A.
last words?
Yeah, you get last word, so we always give our guests last word of the show. You can obviously promote your book. If you don't mind sending us an email of where we can find it and find you, we'll include it in the link of this video and in the description of the video. We're not massive, but if we send anybody your way, we had a couple people in chat asking some pretty interesting questions. And obviously, myself, Triple A, we're science and sci-fi fans, so it's kind of how we came across your profile, and it's a pleasure kind of getting you here. But if you have anything you'd like to say, or would you just promote your book, you're more than welcome to do so. Please send us the link so we can include them in the description. The last however long you want to talk is yours, and then we'll wrap things up.
Okay, I would just say, I'll be real brief. I would just say that there are a lot of ideas we discussed today. There's a lot of things to think about the future. Nobody knows what the future will hold. We can have our hopes and dreams, but we can control how we feel about it. And I think that one of the positive things that we can do for ourselves and for others is to remain optimistic and to look at the potential, the potential for good rather than all the bad stuff that happens. And I do believe that when you get to know people, regardless of their religion, regardless of their political stance, if you get to know them personally, you find out they're very much like you are. So we have to take that attitude and communicate, and we have to accept the fact that people believe what they're going to believe, and it's okay as long as they don't destroy the world.
As long as they'll take the world down swinging. Fair enough. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Guys, next week we are back again. We have another podcast with a different guest. I don't remember the topic right offhand, but we'll see you then. So join us next week.